Hi, it's Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drill Down. Well, Donald Trump blew up Iran's nuclear program, but that's not the only thing he blew up. We're going to talk about that and why it's a good thing. The co-host of this program, of course, is Eric Eggers. Eric, how are you?
I'm just doing my best not to blow anything else up during the course of this podcast, Peter Schweizer. How are you?
I'm good. This is a remarkable time because, of course, we have the military exchange with Iran that's taking place. There's a ceasefire on, there's a ceasefire off. But I think what's interesting in looking at the larger context is that Donald Trump not only blew up these reactors, he has blown up conventional wisdom because everybody is trying to put him in a certain niche. American foreign policy over the last really probably 60 years has been guided by people that fit into a certain camp. You have the interventionists, or what some people call the neocons, who like military muscle. They like using it. They don't mind, using physical force to advance their interests. Then you have the so-called isolationists. They don't want any part of anything. These camps are all trying to claim Trump as their own. They're all trying to claim it as part of the MAGA movement. And Donald Trump says, I'm not playing by those rules. I'm going to be unpredictable. And I think this is a return to the sort of great traditional diplomacy, power projection that we saw in the 19th century that was based on what's actually going to go on. We're going to evaluate what's happening and we're going to respond accordingly. We're not going to have some preconceived script of what we should be doing.
Now, hang on. When you say 19th century, do you mean like Howard Taft, or do you mean like Ronald Reagan in the 20th century?
No, I'm talking 19th century.
Okay.
Great power politics of Europe, where you had diplomats, there were alliances, there were shifting alliances, there were wars that were taking place, and you had to make a decision about whether you're going to go to war based on your national interests. Sometimes you did, sometimes you didn't, and you made that calculation on that particular circumstance. Where I think Trump has blown up is the notion that you have to fit into one of these camps. You're either a neocon interventionist or you're an isolationist, and both sides get angry when he doesn't conform to what they want them to do.
Yeah, I'm reminded of when he first ran for president, Jeb Bush, who was the presumptive frontrunner at the time, called Donald Trump, and what he thought was going to be a sick burn. Mm-hmm. He said Donald Trump is the chaos candidate, and that may have, in hindsight, be one of the only things the Jeb Bush campaign for president got correct, because he has proven to be chaotic. But maybe a better way to put it, to your point, is he's a disruptor, and he has disrupted so many things. He's clearly currently disrupted Iran's nuclear capacity, we think, but he's also disrupted what we understand to be traditional alliances, both domestically and internationally. I mean, when you've got people like Mark Levin criticizing emotionally Donald Trump, and people on MSNBC celebrating him, and you've got people like AOC being aligned with MTG and Steve Bannon. I mean, it's a weird time, and that's because he has disrupted the status quo in a way that's left the traditional alliances also kind of non-existent anymore.
Yeah, domestically and also internationally, because let's remember, which American president is the only one since Jimmy Carter who actually brokered a peace deal in the Middle East? It was Donald Trump with the Abraham Accords. And all the predictions were, this is ridiculous, this is stupid. Trump would take actions like he killed Soleimani, the Iranian leader. Everybody was saying, oh my God, this is going to be World War III. Mm-hmm. Less than a year later, we got the Abraham Accords. So there is a method to the madness, and we're going to unpack what's going on today.
Well, I'm really excited you said that, and I'm really excited you talked about the Abraham Accords and used the phrase method to the madness, because Abraham Accords brings with it this statesman-like diplomatic effort.
Yeah.
Madness also invokes this quote from Donald Trump this morning as he was getting off of a helicopter and talking about the current, let's call it, tentative state of relationships between Israel and Iran.
Israel says that Iran violated the peace agreement and the ceasefire agreement. Do you believe that Iran is still committed to peace?
Yeah, I do. They violated it, but Israel violated it too.
Are you questioning if Israel is committed?
Israel, as soon as we made the deal, they came out and they dropped a load of bombs, the likes of which I've never seen before. The biggest load that we've seen. I'm not happy with Israel. You know, when I say, okay, now you have 12 hours, you don't go out in the first hour and just drop everything you have on them. So I'm not happy with them. I'm not happy with Iran either. But I'm really unhappy if Israel's going out this morning because of one rocket that didn't land, that was shot, perhaps by mistake, that didn't land. I'm not happy about that. You know what? We basically have two countries that have been fighting so long and so hard that they don't know what the they're doing. Do you understand that?
Do you kind of respond to Iran?
And there you go.
There you
the
go.
Geopolitics of Donald Trump. So let's unpack how we got to this circumstance,
Yeah.
right? There's a history here. So let's talk about how we got here. Then let's follow the money. Now, that's kind of an interesting take on this approach, but that's what we do at the Government Accountability Institute, and I think it's relevant to this story. And then finally, let's look at where things might be going within the context of understanding how unpredictable Donald Trump is based on the circumstances. Unpredictable, I would argue, in a good way. So how did we get to the point where Iran is developing nuclear weapons? There's no disputing that. It seems to me there are two questions here that everybody has been trying to figure out with this crisis. Number one, is Iran close to getting a nuclear weapon? And number two, does Iran have a nuclear weapon scare you?
Yeah.
To me, the second question, if you answer no, I just think you're not paying attention to history. But that first question, how close they are to getting, how did they begin this nuclear program, and how did they get to this stage to where they are now?
Well, like most bad ideas, Iran having a nuclear program we can blame on Dwight Eisenhower and communists. Because it's my understanding.
You sound like a John Bircher, by the way.
Well, hey, this is actually really interesting to me, but like if you kind of look into it, so after we drop the atomic bomb, then we're sort of filled with this guilt and angst, and there's lots of communist sympathizers who are encouraging us to de-escalate, and we try to prove that we're very peaceful and pacifist.
Right.
So the Eisenhower administration begins something called the Atoms for Peace program.
Okay.
And you knew about this, and I just learned about this. And so basically, their nuclear program began. Iran's did in 1957 after we agreed to a civilian nuclear cooperation known as the Cooperation Concerning Civil Uses of Atoms through the Atoms for Peace program. This was an Eisenhower administration initiative. And, so it starts off as this good idea. We're giving atomic and nuclear energy to lots of different interests in that region because we're like, look, it can be good. Nuclear energy is a positive thing.
Yep.
We're not the bad guys anymore. But unfortunately, the Atoms for Peace becomes kind of Atoms for Armageddon, right? There's a phrase I learned a long time ago, Peter Schweizer. Today's problems are yesterday's solutions. And
sounds like from a counselor.
it was actually from a state legislator. But I like where you're going with that.
What's interesting about that initiative, by the way, the goal of the Eisenhower administration was they feared that other countries were going to seek a nuclear bomb. So the theory was if we give them peaceful nuclear energy, because of course, if you build a nuclear reactor, that doesn't automatically allow you to build weapons. You have to enrich the uranium much further than you do for a civilian program to actually build a bomb. So the theory was we're going to kind of get them on this track of civilian. We'll have some level of control because we helped them build it. Certainly Iran at that time was under the Shah, who was an ally. So that was the impetus behind it, but it kind of stayed that way. And then 1979, the Ayatollah takes over. And then we have another big turn that starts to occur in the, Obama administration.
I thought you were going to say the 19th century again. I wasn't ready for that one.
I like the wigs. I like the guys in the wigs.
Like Millard Fillmore for life, son. So Israel, right, they tend to take a turn, and obviously when the Ayatollah takes over, then the idea of Iran having access to nuclear technology becomes a different prospect.
Yeah.
And everyone sort of seems on board with the idea that we're going to do whatever we can to keep them from enriching this power until somebody becomes Secretary of State, and that would become Hillary Clinton. Now, this is obviously an initiative of the Obama administration, but it's been reported that while Obama may have led talks to try to engage Iran, there's lots of other diplomatic variables at stake. What's true, and this has been reported, this got reported heavily before or during her campaign for president, but the Wall Street Journal says Hillary Clinton in her last months as Secretary of State opened the door to a dramatic shift in U.S. policy towards Iran, which was an acceptance that Tehran would maintain at least some capacity to produce nuclear fuel. Her top aide, Jake Sullivan, who would later become the Biden administration's national security advisor, meets in secret with Iranian diplomats. And because they can't really make any progress diplomatically, then basically after she leaves the State Department, the Obama administration agrees publicly that Iran could continue to enrich uranium completing, as the Wall Street Journal reports, the shift in policy that had been set in motion before Mrs. Clinton left her post. So it's a conceded fact that international acceptance of Iran's capacity to enrich uranium begins while Hillary is Secretary of State. Some would suggest like kind of at her or like under her command, right?
Yeah. We're going to get to the motives in a second because you've done some really interesting research in that area. So Hillary Clinton leaves as Secretary of State. John Kerry, Lurch, as Rush Limbaugh used to call him, becomes the Secretary of State. Probably the person in Washington with the most capacity to think he has gravitas when he doesn't, the way he presents himself. But
it's the hair, right? I mean, if you have that kind of hair.
It's the stern look. It's the stern look. I can't imagine being his kid, when he comes in and you've disappointed him. But he becomes Secretary of State, and he negotiates the nuclear deal with Iran. And essentially what it says is, okay, we give up. We're going to allow you to have this capacity to refine and enrich uranium beyond the needs of a civilian nuclear program.
But we're going to monitor it.
Yeah, but we're going to monitor it. And by the way, you're going to let us monitor it, right?
We're also going to give you billions of dollars.
Yeah, in good faith, quote unquote, good faith, you're going to allow us to monitor it. And as a sign of our good faith, that relations are improving, we're going to give you, I think it was $15 billion. That was the nuclear deal that was struck. And really, ever since then, there has been this massive fear that the Iranians could move towards the actual production of a nuclear weapon. What's interesting to me is, of course, all along the way, since that time, the Israelis have done all kinds of things to the Iranians. I mean, they've put bugs in the internet to damage their computers. They've killed nuclear scientists. They've done a series of things, and then things kind of came to a head when Tulsi Gabbard was the head of national intelligence, testified a couple of months ago, and she said two things. The first thing was picked up on by the mainstream media, where she says at present it does not appear that there is any Iran is undertaking to actually build a nuclear weapon. And that was widely quoted. But what she also testified is that they continue to produce large quantities of uranium enriched above 60%, making them weapons grade, and that they have the capacity within 2 weeks to actually create a nuclear weapon. And that's kind of what put us in the situation to where we are now.
Yeah, and we should connect a couple of those dots because people on the right, like there are some people on the right, including like the Tucker Carlsons of the world, who think that Iran's nuclear ambitions don't pose an imminent threat. And so why would we need to engage now at the behest, they say, of Israel? And your point would be the reason why Iran doesn't currently have the capacity, we think, to do anything is because of what you just said that Israel has been doing for the last decade plus, right? Like their the computer virus that they are launching to damage their centrifuges, the assassination attempts of scientists and other key officials. Those are all reasons why Iran's nuclear program has not advanced beyond the point where it is today.
Yeah, and the point where it is right now is very scary, right? Within a 2-week period, they are supposed to have the material to actually create the weapon systems. We know they have delivery vehicles. And here's, I think, the mistake that Tucker and the other critics of military action are avoiding. They want to go back to 2003 and say, look, we were told that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction. So intelligence is always exaggerating the threat posed by these countries in developing these weapons. That's true. That was an intelligence failure. That's true. What they're skipping over is what happened in 2017 when the world woke up and said, my God, there was a big explosion. The North Koreans just blew up a nuclear device. And we were shocked because if in 2003 we had overestimated the Iraqis' ability to develop nuclear weapons, we underestimated the capacity of North Koreans. And so the question is, intelligence is a guessing game. How do you know it's 2003 and not 2017? And it goes to that fundamental second question we asked, which is, does it bother you if Iran has a nuclear weapon? And the notion that Iran having a nuclear weapon is like France having a nuclear weapon or Israel having a nuclear weapon is absurd because they don't believe in deterrence. They have these things called suicide bombers. They have these terrorist groups that they can give nuclear devices to. A device goes off in Baltimore How do you know the Iranians were behind it? So it's a lot different for Iran having a bomb than these other countries that already have them.
It's not disputed that Iran has used a lot of money to fund terror across the globe. We talked about the $15 billion that the Biden administration the Obama administration unfroze for Iran as part of that deal. By the way, do you know what the Iranian GDP is at that time?
No.
What, you don't know? I just wanted to do that. It's for
You didn't do the smirk quite right.
I'll have to work on it. It's $400 billion. How dare you? But I think that the point would be that the France comparison is a good one. Iran and France are not the same countries, and they have completely different aims. And one is a known sponsor of state terror, the other is not. And so one of them having access to a weapon presents a very different threat than the other.
Yeah, and one has said death to America for 40 years. The other one, I don't know how you say death to America in French, but I've never heard the French say it. So it's a totally different context. So that's how we got here. Now, the second thing we wanted to talk about, you did some very interesting research. You could look at what Hillary Clinton did, what Barack Obama did in terms of allowing Iran more freedom in their nuclear program. And you could say, well, maybe they're just naive, right? They're trusting liberals, or maybe they're just cynical and they don't think it's going to work. But there's actually a follow the money component to this as well.
Well, it's really funny that you say, like, I did some research. Actually, you did the research in your book, Clinton Cash.
I forgot about that. That's 10 years ago.
Too many bestsellers ago, everybody. But it is true. I do remember that one of the things that we had in the book was that this cell phone company, Ericsson, had paid Bill Clinton big money for a speech, $750,000, as it turns out. And at the time, they were doing business in Iran while Hillary was trying as Secretary of State to decide which companies who were doing business in Iran would receive sanctions or would not receive sanctions. And Ericsson, coincidentally enough, were left off of the sanctions list for doing business with Iran that Hillary her State Department approved,
right?
While they're paying Bill $750,000. What's also interesting is in this time when she's Secretary of State, which again concludes with her setting in motion this shift towards Iran's capacity to enrich nuclear fuel. What's also true is the single largest donor to the Clinton Foundation, somebody named Victor Pinchuk, who owns a manufacturer that ships railroad parts, is doing millions of dollars worth of business in Iran in May of 2012 while Hillary is Secretary of State, and over the same time where they're funneling money to the Clinton Foundation.
I think $10 million they were given a year, something like that.
I mean, big money. And then you also have her relationship with Honeywell, which was another big benefactor for the Clinton donation, and they had a number of business interests in Iran as well. So it's just interesting, and we're not saying that Hillary's Clinton Foundation took bribes to let Iran enrich uranium, but what is true is that the Clinton Foundation was taking money. Bill Clinton was being paid by people who had business interests in Iran and who were trying very much to avoid penalties for doing so when many others in the United States face those same consequences.
Yeah, no, and I think you raised a really important point here, because the thing we know about large corporations is they're always looking for new markets, right? This is why they rushed into China in the 1980s, 1990s, and have been ever since. It's a big market. What is one of the few large markets left? We now know the GDP is $400 billion. Thank you very much.
And we know the population is 92 million.
That's one of the few untapped markets left, because there have been these sanctions imposed on Iran for all these years. So companies like Ericsson and Victor Pinchuk's interests and other commercial interests want to get into the Iranian market, and they're motivated. So that's, I don't think, the sole motivation for Hillary Clinton. But look, if you can do good and do well in her mind at the same time, you're going to be willing to do it. Now, one of the companies that was also interested in getting into the Iranian market is a German company called Bertelsmann. And Bertelsmann is a conglomerate, has a lot of industrial products, a lot of branches. And what's interesting, people have raised this issue. What's interesting about Bertelsmann is they actually, in the beginning of the Obama administration, undertook an initiative to make the case for loosening sanctions of Iran, for engaging with Iran. And they pushed very aggressively for it.
With the Obama administration.
With the Obama administration. Barack Obama didn't go as far as they wanted to go, but he certainly took a lot of steps in that direction, the nuclear deal being one of them. Barack Obama, of course, leaves the Oval Office in January of 2017, signs a, I believe, $60 million book deal.
For 2 books, yeah?
Yeah, 2 books with a publisher. That publishing house that gives him $60 million just happens to be owned by Bertelsmann. So, again, not saying that's the sole motivation, but it is interesting when you've got all of these interests that are desirous of you taking a course of action, and you take that course of action, you certainly need to look at the financial component.
Follow-up question.
Yeah.
Did his books earn out?
No. No.
That's author talk for. They didn't make enough money to quantify the advance. By the way, I mentioned this actually on an interview with Greg Kelly the other day. You've been talking about that for some time, and that is one of the few legal ways that companies can still pay politicians, right? You can pay for speeches and you can give them book advances, and that is maybe one of the most relevant and underreported examples of a company with real deal international interests that a presidential administration can weigh in on, and then they are able to then legally give money to the person that was president at the time.
That's right. They can't give him $60 million to do just anything. But if you are in office, if you are a member of the U.S. Senate, for example, you can sign a book deal, and it is a good way for elected officials to make money. Those books rarely earn out. In other words, rarely are they actually profitable for the publishers, but they're probably profitable in other ways. So we've talked about how we got here, the fact that you had this shift in the Obama administration to favor loosening the standards and the expectations of Iran for its nuclear program. We've followed the money and said, look, there are a lot of corporations that want to get in the Iranian market, a lot of money being tossed around. Let's talk about where this all goes, because there's a lot of people frustrated and angry with Trump right now. Trump himself is frustrated and angry.
As we heard.
Yeah, I'm going to make the case that actually he has played this pretty well. Because, again, it comes down to 3 options. One option that he had before the strike was to do nothing, which I think is a no-starter. You're basically allowing the Iranians to be in this position where they accumulate more and more fissionable material that you can turn into a weapon. They have the capacity to do it in 2 weeks. And, you know, this is not like the movies. You can't assume that you know they're assembling a bomb. You're hoping based on your intelligence assets, but you don't know. So that's not an acceptable option. The other option is we're going to do a regime change. We're going to go in, we're going to put boots on the ground. We've done this before. It is massively costly in terms of American lives, vastly costly in terms of government spending, hundreds of billions of dollars. So the third option is this, a selective strike, not designed to change the regime, but designed to say, we're going to set back your nuclear program for years, if not decades, based on the action that we've taken. So I think they've made the right choice, but you have factions on both sides that are going to be angry. And I think he's going to continue to play this in a way that's not predictable. He desires some kind of negotiated settlement with Iran that says, let's have an agreement where we can actually inspect your facilities whenever we want. He doesn't want to have a prolonged war, but he wants a better deal, and I think that is the best place to go.
Yeah, we'll see if the ceasefire holds. We'll see if even between the time that we record this podcast and it comes out the next day, if the ceasefire is still in. But to your point about Trump being a disruptor, he disrupts traditional alliances. He disrupts the expected status quo and the constituencies you would expect somebody to kind of represent. I'll admit, when I first heard that this was happening, I expected it to be a prolonged thing. And as I looked into the money behind it, and I see that U.S. defense contractors like RTX, which is Raytheon, General Dynamics, Lockheed Martin, they're all involved in the Israeli missile defense system.
Yep.
Raytheon produces the Iron Dome and Interceptor missiles. Lockheed Martin makes the F-35 planes. Boeing supplies the precision-guided munitions, right? And these are companies that are very relevant in terms of how they shape our national defense. I mean, the irony, of course, with Dwight Eisenhower starting the Atoms for Peace program is that Iran's nuclear ambitions may have been ended actually by the military-industrial complex because they're dropping big munitions.
Right.
But the point is, those guys matter. That's what he warned about. And I was sort of expecting that you might see the status quo continue just because it's good business. I mean, it's been reported that it's costing Israel $200 million a day and that's money that's going to U.S. defense companies. But in some ways, Trump calling a ceasefire might also be frustrating for some of these defense contractors that make money off of the perpetuation and continuation of this conflict. But then if you look into who did the defense industry actually support during the last campaign, I was surprised Donald Trump was the second largest recipient of defense industry donations at $1.5 million. But the number one recipient was Kamala Harris with $3.5 million. So
I thought it was going to be the Green Party. I mean, you make a great point there. And look, here's the thing. The status quo can be enormously profitable. And you look at all the conventional wisdom in Washington that says, here's the way that we should handle the Middle East. This is the way we've been doing it for 40 years. And you have to ask yourself, what's the last 40 years been like? Mm-hmm. It's not been good. It's not been good. And I'm not saying you can go in and fix it, but maybe the idea of trying something different is a good idea. He showed with the Abraham Accords that it's possible to make progress. You've got the Saudis that signed an agreement, a peace agreement with the Israelis. Who would have imagined that? Let's hope that that's the byproduct of what comes next. So what's your prediction a year from now? I know this is a tough one. Where do you think we're going to be? Is the Middle East going to be more unstable or more stable than it is right now?
I just want to quote my favorite senatorial philosopher, Joni Ernst. A year from now, we'll all be dead.
So you're definitely on the gloomer side.
I'm a WW3, baby.
Yeah.
No, I think that it's crazy, but I will say that if, to the extent that, like in baseball, a pitcher that's sort of effectively wild, you don't know what's going to happen, and it keeps the batter from being too aggressive at the plate. It does seem like Donald Trump cultivates this like peace through strength, and you kind of don't know what he's going to do.
Yeah.
And so I do think, here's one thing I do know, is that I think Donald Trump cares very much about America, and he cares very much about America's brand, and he likes very much to be associated with success. I saw this quote on Sunday. He gave this to the Wall Street Journal, and this is after the success of the bombing of the facilities. And just think about this from the commander-in-chief. He goes, our country is hot as a pistol. 6 months ago, our country was cold as ice. It was dead. And he called the strikes a great victory for our country. So he's like, we got the juice. We're like, we got the Riz back.
Yeah.
And I think it's just interesting. Like, he cares about that as much as anything else. So I do think that he's going to continue to try to put us in a position where we're seen as a success and an elite brand. And I think that that's what will guide our steps over the next year. And I think ultimately that requires success and peace, because I do think he apparently wants very much to be the recipient of the Nobel Peace Prize.
Yeah, he seems to be interested in that. And who wouldn't be, right? Who wouldn't be? Well, we appreciate you, as always, taking the time to listen to this podcast. We know your time is valuable. You can find out more about our research at thedrilldown.com. And you can also subscribe to this podcast. We would appreciate it if you would do so. Thanks again for listening. Until next time.